It's lovely to see you all and have a chat on this Monday. I know lots of people are returning to their workplaces, or, you know, as lots of you are essential workers, have been doing that for weeks now, so thank you. But if you return to work today or you've got some working from home stories, love to see them in the chat. Love hearing from all of you.
And make sure you introduce yourselves as well and let us know where you're from. And we will get started shortly.
Oh.
Hi Naomi, welcome.
Right. Okay.
Oh, great. So we've got 21 people here. That's fantastic. All right. Well, I think we can get started. I'll stop sharing my welcome screen. Hi, everyone. I just want to do, well, thanks everyone for jumping on. I know it's Monday night. We've all finished work. I'd also like to acknowledge that we meet digitally on the land of the Whadjuk Noongar people, and I want to pay my respects, our respects to elders past, present and future, and acknowledge the contribution of the Noongar people in Western Australia. Now, just as we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. So everyone, apart from us four, who you can all see, is automatically muted. So if you've got a question, and obviously this is a question and answers forum, you will see a raise hand button. So please raise your hand and we will allow you, we will unmute you and you can ask your question, or alternatively ask your question in the chat box. A big congratulations again to everyone for navigating this new digital territory and making it here. I know that it's been a couple of months and we've been doing a few online events, but it doesn't run smoothly for everyone, and we definitely acknowledge that. And I can see we have many of our wonderful SOS activists here, but we've also got some new supporters, which is great to see. So for those of you who haven't had much to do with Save Our Services, we have been a campaign led by Unions WA and public sector unions for the last decade. We've been fighting to stop privatisation, to support the public sector workforce and to ensure quality public services for all Western Australians. And I say we have been in the past tense. For those of you who we haven't reached yet, we have some special news. Due to the success of Save Our Services over the last decade, we've decided on a fresh new angle to keep campaigning for the public sector. The public good will be fighting to stop privatisation just like SOS, and to build a strong public sector ensuring quality public services. So keep an eye and an ear out for opportunities to participate in the public good. And we'd also love to hear what you think about our new name. So if you do have any comments, please put them in the chat. Now, nearly 2 months ago, we ran a volunteer meeting where some of our core volunteers indicated they would like to hear from union leaders. And tonight's event was made possible by our volunteers speaking up about what they'd be interested in doing. So thanks to everyone who attended that meeting. Tonight, we are hosting 2 public sector union secretaries who will be weighing in on what has been going on for their membership during the pandemic. We have Naomi McRae from the Health Services Union and Ricky Hendon from the Community and Public Sector Union Civil Service Association. So a warm welcome to both of you. I'm going to hand over to Naomi first, and Naomi's going to tell us a bit about what's been going on in the health sector during the campaign, during the pandemic. Getting my words crossed. So over to you, Naomi.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yep.
Yep.
Well, thank you. I was going to actually start with just a little bit of an overview of the Health Services Union as a description of who our membership is and what the focus of our work is. So we're essentially a very broad generalist health union in a sense. We cover a range of occupations across health, and that includes aged care, disabilities, pathology and radiology. And essentially we cover allied health professionals, medical scientists, a whole range of medical technical people, as well as clerks, administrators, supervisors, managers. There's just a very broad range of occupational groups we cover across private and public health, as well as those other industry sectors I mentioned. So we've had a really interesting experience the last couple of months, our members particularly, and we'll get to more of that in a moment. But just how we work essentially is we have a committee of management, which is 12 of our members, and that's actually quite an illustrative of the kind of members we have. Our president, our long-standing president, is the head of library at South Metro and East Metro Health Service, and our vice president, Brendan McKernan, sorry, that was Cheryl Hamill, and our vice president, Brendan McKernan, is a senior radiation therapist at Sir Charles Gardner Hospital. So our committee of management essentially covers the field in terms of the breadth of our coverage. We have others on the Committee of Management in Path West, obviously Health Shared Services, and a range of other allied health people, so podiatrists, occupational therapists, pharmacy. So essentially we have our committee. I'm appointed the secretary to do the day-to-day operations of the union. We have about 18 staff, and effectively we're part of also a federated large national union, the Health Services Union, and so we're one of the 8 branches of that. That's actually 100,000 members nationally. It's a large union. So what I was going to mention was really, I should introduce myself. I've been the secretary since July last year. The long-standing secretary, Dan Hill, retired last year. So I've come on in a very interesting time. I was just starting to get my real hang around understanding our membership and the key issues, which was a lot to do with the Commission's Instruction 23, which is essentially the conversion to permanency process. That was my first, big piece of work as I came into the union. And now we've had obviously the pandemic, and that's obviously required a huge amount of change across the health sector, a huge amount of adaptation required by our members, flexibility, real willingness to take on what was an incredible sense of uncertainty with a whole lot of goodwill and professionalism. And I guess my experience of that was just how incredible and well-trained and professional our membership is. And I think we all know that when we go to hospital, you're glad that you're in Western Australia. But it's been an incredible experience from where I sit as a new secretary, to see how our members have responded. And there's lots of challenges that have come out of it. There's things that didn't go well, and I'm sure people would like to talk about some of those things. There's lots of lessons learnt, and we're still early on in the piece, really. We all know this is, somewhere near the end of the beginning. So that's where I sit. I think I might leave it at that for the intro.
Want me to intro as well?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so my name is Ricky Hendon. I'm the branch secretary of the CPSU CSA in Western Australia. We do cover some people in the private sector, but predominantly we cover state public sector workers in Western Australia from a really broad range of government agencies. So basically, I think, our coverage is about just shy of 40,000 people in the public sector. And they are people who do jobs as diverse as child protection, community corrections, people who work at the Department of Transport doing your driver's tests, a range of people. So in terms of my background, I have been secretary of the union since 2018. where I was fortunate to take over from the long-standing secretary, Tony Walkington, who had been in a role of leadership for about 20 years, which is pretty incredible. So like Naomi, I'm relatively speaking a new secretary, but I was very fortunate to serve alongside Tony for a number of years as assistant secretary before that. My experience in leadership at the union has been across a range of different campaigns. I've actually had a long-standing involvement with Save Our Services, so it's really, you know, fascinating to kind of see it from its fledgling roots and for it to become its new iteration, which we're talking about a bit later on in this discussion. In terms of our members and their involvement in the public health response to COVID-19, we've had members from a range of different agencies involved in that public health response. Obviously, we cover some members in the Department of Health, including those in the Communicable Disease Directorate. So obviously they've been very, very busy during this period. But also we've had members at the Police Assistance Centre who have been very, very busy as well. So at the peak of this first wave, as Naomi has sort of called it, there were about 500 to 600 extra calls being received a day, and they were completely sort of flooded through that. So basically had lots of people working overtime with no breaks to field all the calls that were coming in from COVID-19. We've got a range of different people who've been involved in different aspects of dealing with the pandemic, but I'm happy to talk about those in a bit more detail later on. So that's just a very quick intro about me and our union. Happy to hand over back to Naomi.
Yeah, so Beck and I had a question to Naomi, what we've been wondering, and I think a lot of our volunteers have as well, is what are some of the challenges that those in the health sector have been facing due to the pandemic, in particular your membership?
Well, that's a big question, and it does depend where you sit in the structure, and that means someone working in a private hospital, somebody working in private pathology has had a very different experience from some of our members in a public hospital. So, for example, our private pathology members, like phlebotomists, were immediately impacted by a huge loss of work, essentially, once the pandemic hit. The testing of going to your GP and having a medical test just stopped. So that has been a huge issue for our members who've literally been stood down, lost work. At the same time, there was incredible pressure at Path West, our public sector pathology. So there's been a real mix depending on where you sit in the sector. Look, in terms of the public hospitals, what was most apparent was a huge amount of work went straight into aligning critical care beds, essentially, and then the workforce that would sit around them. And look, I think we started with 157 or around that ICU beds, and the aim of this state government has been to get to around 620. I think that's probably still the aim, but whether we're going to need the workforce that sits around it and all the changes that had kind of happened in the industry or across hospitals to move and shift work around that. And that included not doing elective surgery and a lot of surgical procedures because of the lack of PPE. So there was a whole lot of things going on at once. But it was really, I guess now we have the benefit of a bit of hindsight that it was just a huge amount of change very quickly, and it was disproportionate.
And Ricky, for you, what are some of the challenges that the CSA membership, again a big question, have been facing due to the pandemic?
So there's been a series of, because of the breadth of our membership, it's been experienced quite differently in different parts of the public sector. As I mentioned earlier, for some it's very direct. So Police Assistance Centre, for example, had huge amounts of workload. Manages corporate services in public schools. So many you would understand that role more as the registrar of the school, I think is more the historical name for the role. They did a heap of legwork to ensure that measures such as increased cleaning regimes were introduced in schools following political announcements. So often there were political announcements around measures to be put in place because of COVID-19, and, you know, trying to get kids to return to schools or leave schools. And our members had to respond very, very quickly to actually make that happen. So in the structure of schools, there's your principals, and then your manager of corporate services does a lot of the doing legwork of that to coordinate all of that. So it's been huge for them. There's also just been the challenge of ongoing service delivery. So our members do work like child protection, community corrections, and that's work that continues. Sadly, child abuse continues, crime continues while all these things are going on. So the maintenance of critical services has been, you know, incredibly important. So there have been some of the challenges. We've had a few others as well in terms of being able to practice safely whilst delivering services, or actually making the call that it wasn't safe to deliver services. So for example, transport driving assessors, so the people who do your driving test, which for me, they're totally delightful members, but brings up all sorts of horrific memories of me trying to get my driver's license. So I'm sure I cried at one of them at some point when I was in my teens. Basically, they got to a point where they didn't feel comfortable being in a car with people coming in and doing their test because they weren't able to effectively social distance. People had their hands all over the car. You weren't able to necessarily clean the car in a way that was safe. So they made a collective call to use their capacity under the Occupational Health and Safety Act to say, well, actually, we're going to refuse to do work that's unsafe, and we believe this is unsafe. So as a result of that, drivers' tests got cancelled for a period across the Department of Transport, unless there were some very specific circumstances. So, you know, a lot of the challenges have been people having to say that in this work context, this work is no longer safe, or I have to do my work differently for it to be safe. So that has just played out in a variety of different ways, really.
And I just heard today, was it this week they're coming back in yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So they will be coming back in, and we've had consultation with our members and delegates, and on the whole, that's coming out with members and delegates saying they're feeling much more comfortable about returning at this point. They've got some conditions around that. There's detail around that, but you know, they want to make sure that they're coming back on terms that they're comfortable with.
Great work. And I just want to go over to some of our attendees. Does anyone have any questions so far around what's been going on in the public sector, or anything that you've been itching to know about? You can either raise your hand, you'll see a little raise hand button, or you can pop your questions in the chat. So I'll leave it open just for the moment. Oh, come on. I know someone's got a question.
While we're on that, Beck, we really want to hear all your questions, but I have a few that have come through, so I might ask those. So Ricky, you obviously spoke about being in really close quarters with people, and Naomi, you spoke about like the shortages of PPE. But for both of you, I'll let Naomi go first, and Ricky, what are some of the other OSH challenges that some of your memberships faced?
Yeah, well, the capacity to work safely in a hospital environment all depends. Well, there's a range of things. We have a PPE policy guideline for the clinical setting that has been released by Health, and there's also the community setting guidelines for the use of PPE and professional first responders now. But the initial stages were very, obviously we all reflect back, but March was very much a period of uncertainty of, well, no one knew how much the disease had spread, and people in various different occupational roles in a hospital coming into contact in a close way with patients. And that could be in pharmacy, it could be in a whole range of different work. Look, Breast Screen WA had to close down for a period because just the close nature of working with people across a lot of our membership. Look, just like what Ricky just explained about going for a driving test. So it all depends on, you know, where people sat in the spectrum of how closely they interact with people, and also what their work place look like? We had a surprising number of members working in very closed, small spaces in hospitals. So to practice social distancing of 1.5 metres where there was lots of hot desking going on, I mean, it's just really difficult for people. And look, I think again, there's so many things that this whole pandemic has raised. And one of them is about our basic ways we structure how we sit and work. Because when we need to have any flexibility around that, we find out, like, even, you know, the union office, we find real problems. Well, how are we going to manage that? And I think the other thing I'll add is just IT. And I think one of the things also exposed by the pandemic has been the various levels of capacity for different agencies, and this includes across public health, which is the 7 employing entities, of a whole range of IT issues related to whether people could work from home, whether people be allowed to work from home. It just raises so many issues, and I think they're going to be ongoing. And I think there needs to be a whole lot more investment in the capacity of the public sector to be able to access and do their work from home.
Just on the same question about occupational health and safety, just want to, you know, reinforce that point about hot desking. Huge issue across different parts of the public sector, and is packaged up nowadays as something called activity-based working, which is all very interesting. But big issues in Department of Finance, Planning, Lands and Heritage, and Communities with their new move to Fremantle in particular. I do think that's got to be an ongoing conversation about what the future of hot desking is in the current environment. I don't think that's going to be something that quickly drops off the agenda, and I think there's a conversation about whether it has a place in this sort of climate. We think there's a whole bunch of other issues around hot desking, but yeah, we've got some serious concerns about that. Other things that were raised with us in terms of OSH issues were aerosol generating procedures in dental health, and it took a really long time actually for Northern Metropolitan Health Service to get their act together and actually put something out. Yeah, no, shock horror, Naomi, right? Such a model employer. You know, to get something out to employees saying, actually, this is how you do this safely, or you shouldn't be doing this at all. So ultimately, a lot of procedures were ceased in dental health services, but it probably came only after people had to raise the issue up the line and say something needs to be done about this. We also had lots of difficulties getting people to work from home. Some agencies did a really fantastic job at getting their staff, had a very facilitative approach about getting their staff to work from home, and others were really, really recalcitrant around it, is probably the nicest thing to say. Even with people who fell into that vulnerable category as defined by the AHPPC, so people who had, you know, autoimmune disorders, people who had other chronic health issues and fell into those other age and other brackets, which meant that if you get COVID-19, you're at a much higher risk of getting very serious symptoms. So they were all things that we encountered. We also encountered, in terms of OSH issues, just a range of frustratingly different responses, even within one agency. So for example, in schools, you'll have some schools that took the initiative at the front desk of the school of putting installing screens, but you've got a whole lot of other ones that haven't, because it's all principal dependent. Similarly, you've got child protection officers where there have been things put in place like screens in different places and interview rooms, and others where they haven't. So, you know, I think that especially for larger agencies, it's been difficult to get a consistent OSH response across all sites, which has been a challenge.
I can definitely imagine. Now we've got another question from Mike, and this question kind of speaks to some work that Save Our Services has been doing already. So for those of you who may not have been involved in the campaign at that point, in the last 6 to 9 months, we did a round of lobbying around wages. We've been starting a conversation around public sector wages, and Mike's question is speaking to that. So it seems advocating a pay increase will be difficult given the economic climate. Can we use this opportunity to strongly support the need for government-owned rather than privatised services? And I'd also like to add to that, and for decent wages.
Can I jump on this one?
Yeah, go
Please.
for it.
Please. Okay, so there's a couple of ways I want to dissect that one. The first is there's been a little bit of material that's been disseminated by economists, which is worth reading, which talks about the fact that the public sector is actually going to be really important in our economic recovery, and public sector wages will play a role in that. So there was an article published by the Centre for Future Work, which highlighted the fact that public sector wages are going to be needed in terms of decent pay increases for people to go back into the economy, start engaging with businesses that have had to close down or have been adversely affected by this period of time, and go back and start to spend in the economy, in the local economy. And without those sort of decent pay increases, there is likely to be quite a detrimental effect on the economy. So there's a bit of a warning there that there's the likelihood of deflation and depression if we don't actually stimulate the economy with that sort of spending, and that the public sector is kind of key to that. So it's really worth sourcing that article and having a read, because it lays that out really, really well. But I also think in terms of stimulus, as the economy as we try to recover, the public service has done really well in terms of having stable, reliable jobs doing work that the community needs. We know that there's a whole lot of places in the public sector that are really struggling to do that important work with the resources they have and with the people that they have. Take child protection, for example, hugely under-resourced, dangerously under-resourced. I think there's room for the government to increase its FTE and employ more people. And I think that would have a direct stimulatory effect of obviously making sure that people aren't unemployed, but also making sure those people who aren't unemployed are then employed in good jobs that our community needs and can go out and deliver some of that public good. I also think in terms of privatisation, the point that you raise, that it is critically important. Some of the things that we encountered during this period were where there were contracted services, so that there were services that typically have been done by the public service but are still contracted out, but that are delivered by the private sector or NGOs, that in a number of instances those services completely dropped off during this period and so weren't reliable for the community. I know in corrective services, had a conversation with people senior in the department there who said that there were about 8 separate services that dropped off in the corrections space during that period. So it's a reminder, actually, if you want a reliable service, come hail, rain or shine, in good times and bad, you want it to be delivered by the public sector. That's my rant.
No, brilliantly done.
Thank you.
I will agree with everything Ricky just said. I will add that, yep, mental services dropped, mental health loss services, believe it or not, that were contracted out. Look, the federal government has had to enter into private viability agreements with Ramsay Healthcare and St John to actually keep private hospitals running. There's a whole range of questions I think that this pandemic has raised about the hybrid models of public and private in health. The pathology I mentioned before, just, completely shambolic kind of, in terms of resources desperately needed, resources available, not going to meet in the middle. And no real kind of capacity or thinking about how, in a time of crisis, the private sector, how the private and public sector should come together. And so everything's happened on the run, but I think a lot of this needs to be thought of what the future looks like, particularly in health. And on the wages, I absolutely agree with Ricky. I mean, it's ironic that the federal government puts out one-off stimulus packages of cash payments, and then at the same time they'll say a public sector needs to have a wage freeze, because it's just so counterintuitive to say we understand what a cash stimulus means, but we won't. Public service must, share the load, or whatever the narrative becomes. It doesn't make any sense. And we will be strongly challenging it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ricky and Naomi. We've got some more questions coming in. So this one is from Lewis, and this one is for Naomi. And I think this might be another one of those big questions, but it's potentially worth asking. Would our health system cope if we tried to systematically test all Western Australians? So do we have the capacity to test all Western Australians for the virus?
Well, I guess there's a number of things you need to be able to do that. The first thing you need is enough reagent, and that was initially one of the big problems with testing, was just the actual capacity to do the tests. My understanding is that we have a lot more capacity to do testing, obviously, which is why every couple of weeks it kind of rolls out further and further. It's actually a very low threshold now to go and get a test. I think the question of whether it becomes across the board to see if we could have an elimination of the virus, I don't see why we're not going to end up in that place, to be honest. I don't think it's probably a question of when.
Awesome, thanks for that. We also have a question here from Anushka. It's a bit of a long one, but Anushka is in the CPSU, PSU space, so the Federal Public
Federal
Service.
Comrades.
Yes, exactly. So similar lines of thinking, and I've been thinking about this myself as well, which is, do you feel that COVID-19 situation has increased public respect and appreciation for the work in which your members do? Do you think that this could be a springboard to the campaign for further funding and staffing around the public sector? Also, do you think that financial implications of the shutdown will mean that your members will face government pressure to cut wages or minimise raises based on a narrative that we all need to tighten our belt, make sacrifices, and get out of this economic hole? Obviously, that's with neoliberal reasoning. Would you like to take that one, Ricky? I'm particularly also interested in that idea around increased public respect and appreciation, because I definitely think that's apparent at the moment, and also apparent a lot around the world as well.
Yeah. Yeah, look, the short answer, I think, on that part of it is absolutely yes. I think there is definitely a springboard there. I think there's a greater recognition and a springboard for us to build on that. You know, I think we've smashed a whole lot of those niggly negative stereotypes during this period about what the public sector is, or the characteristics of the public sector. You know, we've seen people, as others have been able to, you know, work from home, not be able to do that because they had to deliver direct services to the community. We've seen people work really tirelessly on, you know, the direct problem of the virus itself, but also to make sure people have been supported and that they receive the services they need during this period. And I think too, just the speed with which the sector responded to the various challenges as they evolved and as they came up was just phenomenal. And you know, any allegations that the public sector is some sort of big sluggish thing that can't respond appropriately and quickly and, you know, with a real problem solving head it's just false. So I think it's been really, really wonderful, and it sort of validates everything we've been saying for a very long time. And you're right, I think we do need to use this opportunity to latch onto that and build on that in terms of the public narrative, because now it's rooted in something that people have absolutely experienced.
Yeah, definitely. Now I've got another question from Maddie. So Maddie wants to know, I know that many bosses in the private sector have been using COVID-19 as an opportunity to infringe more and more on workers' well-being, unnecessary layoffs, pay cuts, etc. I would also add perhaps abusing things like job seeker and job keeper. Maddie's wondering if similar challenges are being presented to your members in the public sector.
Well, I can go in. First of all, I just want to say that yes, our members have in the private sector have definitely experienced a whole range of unfortunate behaviours from their employer that have exploited the situation. There's also been really good employers, so I'll make that, it has been a mix. But there's certainly been some employers across our membership that have used the payment of JobKeeper to effectively mean that they'll send full-timers on annual leave, at the same time get casuals or part-timers to do extra hours to top out the 750. So there's a whole lot of that going on. In terms of the public sector, look, the best thing is that I think we can reflect on that the capacity of the public sector has been able to respond, just like Ricky said before. And I think that recognition is just huge as a result. So I'm just wondering where I'm going with this. What was the JobKeeper? Sorry, what was it? I can't see anybody.
It's okay. It was the question was about whether public sector bosses have been using the pandemic as a way to exploit or do some really unfortunate things to members.
I don't think anybody's done it in any malicious kind of we need to save lots of money way that I've seen in the private sector, unlawfully in the private sector because of desperation actually. But I do think there's been certainly pockets where clearly members have not been treated well by their supervisors. And look, everyone went through a range of emotions. Some people didn't react very well. I think that's just part of human behaviour, but it would be good if we could say that actually, I think overall it's been really good, but there's certainly been probably some changes that are coming under the cover of COVID, let's just say, that are not necessarily in the best interest of our members.
Yeah, I'd pick up on that point, which was, I think, my major experience. There have been some problems with casuals, I think, in the treatment of casuals, particularly during this period, but also, as Naomi was just saying at the end there, change being pushed through that is not COVID related or urgent, that is being, where COVID is being used as the excuse to do it with limited consultation. And that's a real frustration for us. And that's coming from, not across the sector, but from certain quarters, certain agencies. So that's disappointing because I think there's been a lot of goodwill to kind of, work together and move things along in a speedy way. So understanding that sometimes change is genuinely urgent. And I think now there are some agencies that are just taking advantage and we're jumping on that.
Thanks for that, Ricky and Naomi again. I actually didn't realise myself just how inconsistent it is across the entire sector. It's not something like this really shows where the holes are. Now I've got a raised hand from Christine. So Christine, I'm just going to let you ask your question. Hopefully we can hear you.
You're on mute, Christine.
Oh. No, I don't think we can't hear you, Christine, unfortunately. That's all right.
She's off mute.
Oh. Oh, yay.
Hi.
Hi. Did you have a question for Ricky or Naomi, Christine?
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes.
Oh, I was just wondering about, just during this COVID thing, there's some people that I know have been deployed to help other departments, government departments. And I was wondering, is there a timeline on that deployment and when will they get back to their own jobs?
Who wants to take that one?
You can take that one.
I can take that one. Okay. Look, I guess this is a bit of an issue actually, because one of the things, I think for starters, that there has been probably less deployment across the sector than we anticipated that there might be when we weren't sure about the scale of the issue here in Western Australia and how far it would go before it peaked and plateaued. So we expected a lot more people being called upon to do different work. For the most part, to be honest, some of the arrangements haven't been overly transparent in terms of how they pull people across, because usually it's either a transfer within your agency or a secondment arrangement, and it hasn't been necessarily so formalised this time around. I know that the Public Sector Commission are now engaging in a body of work to look at how to make the public sector more mobile and how to deploy that in these sorts of situations quickly, but also in a way that is not exploitative or against the will of people to go and do that work. My understanding from the Public Sector Commission is those sorts of short-term deployments shouldn't be for periods of longer than 6 months. But again, as I said, I don't know that the conditions around all of these deployments have been particularly well defined in all circumstances. That would be my take on it from the experience I've had with the membership that we've had deployed. For the most part, a lot of the people who have been deployed, because it's largely been to the contact tracing work, many of those have now gone back to their substantive positions. I don't know, Naomi, what was your experience?
Well, it's actually not exactly what you're talking about, but I was just going to mention that, well, Health was going through a massive recruitment drive, WA Health, in the expectation of needing far more staff for the critical care beds. And effectively, that has been a huge exercise, and about 8,000 people have actually have applied. That's doctors, nurses, allied health, and a whole range of our membership. But my understanding is that while there's been a pool created, well, various pools, that, you know, that's where they sit, because, you know, as we've all known, this has changed so quickly. We were escalating up. We've kind of hit a fantastic plateau of very low infections in WA, and now there's this, well, you know, how much do we scale back and how quickly do we do it? And I think that's the real challenge at the moment. I think we'd all be aware that today we entered phase 2 and, you know, they're working from home. The direction really is that to go back to your office if it's safe to do so. So I think we're just in a world of relative change that we should accept as part of how, you know, we all basically need to adjust to that reality that we're now in.
Now, thanks again. And I think Beck was just going to ask one more question, and then we might wrap things up.
Yeah, there's still lots of questions in the chat, and there's still lots of questions that we've already received. So it's going to be hard to pick one, to be honest, but I wanted to end on a bit of a nice and hopefully light note. We've seen, like, across the world, like I said earlier, I think huge shifts in, I think, community sentiment towards public sector. You know, in the UK, we've seen the NHS, the clap on Thursday nights at 8 p.m, which has been nice. I mean, clapping is great, but it doesn't fund the service. I will say that as well. And we've seen lots of really lovely acts of solidarity and acts, I think, of gratitude towards our public sector. I was just wondering if any of you have had some positive or some hopeful stories from the sector of our community showing appreciation, or if you have, like, anything. I guess maybe, I know it's a really horrible time, it's been a horrible time for a lot of people, but if you have a nice story or a good story that's come from that.
Can I just take it back a little bit, and a little bit about our conversation before, where really the sense of recognition and gratitude that we do have this incredible cohort of service delivery from our public sector. We want, obviously, the public good campaign is very important for us to really explain that in an easier way, but leveraging, or, you know, using the direct experience of this pandemic to really demonstrate it. But I guess I'm also want to make sure is that this is a long-standing kind of change. We want this to build into real change. And I mean, better think about our private public sector mix across health particularly, but obviously one thing we've seen just the whole way through this is that the privatised parts of the sector have not worked. Like, it just hasn't worked. So it's absolutely critical that we leverage as much as we can, that we must retain and build a strong public service. And I don't have any particular story to illustrate that off the top of my head, but it's just look, it's been a terrible thing that's happened, but there is a real opportunity for, I think, unions to really take a leading role in a conversation of change. That means to less inequality and a better public service. And yeah, that's it really. But yeah, I just think it's just been extraordinary so far. And I don't think people will forget straight away, but our challenge is to make sure that we really make sure we deliver on a proper changed outcome from it.
Yeah, I think it's that yeah, we are at a bit of a crossroads, and we can't just assume that it's going to be that we're going to take those learnings and roll with them. We have to play, as unions, a very active role in that. But I do think there is a lot of opportunity. I think too, in the not just in the broader community, but the leadership of the public sector, I think, are really open to this conversation about how we change for the better for workers and the better for service delivery. You know, we have had a really strong dialogue with public sector leaders through this period, and I think they've come to value our input, because it's I think so often the relationship between employers and unions is adversarial, and sometimes that can't be helped, but it's been quite genuinely collaborative and problem-solving focused in this period, and I think there's been a better recognition of the role of unions as being value adders and important contributors in this period. So I think there's the hopeful thing for me is that that's a really good foundation that we've established during this period to build on, to get things done in the sector in a way that doesn't always have to be, you know, there will always be a bit of struggle, but an absolute fight all the time. But the other thing I think I take away from this is that as a union that has rights to be in workplaces, we haven't been able to really exercise those industrial rights to be in workplaces during this period. And what that's resulted in is us working differently as a union, engaging with our members and delegates differently, and still showing that we can be effective in that space. It's also meant that we've seen delegates who, you know, already do fantastic things in the workplace absolutely step up and take leadership and take responsibility for engaging with their membership around issues of importance. So, you know, that's been really promising for me, and I think there's a good, again, a good basis to keep building our workplace union leaders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. Now, I'm just going to jump over to Beck, because she's got a special message, a little bit of a goodbye to Save Our Services. So, and I just quickly thank you again to Ricky and Naomi for joining us tonight. We've just got a few concluding remarks though. I promise if you hang around, it'll be worth it.
Yeah, thank you, Beck, and thank you, Ricky and Naomi. What we wanted to do is, as you might have figured out from what Beck said at the start, this, weirdly enough, on a webinar is likely to be our very last event as Save Our Services, which is a bit more of a fizzle than a bang, in which I thought we'd go out, to be quite honest. But it's still absolutely lovely. I was hoping we could see you all in person, but it's just not the way. But what I wanted to do to send us out in a bit of a way is just to really highlight some of the milestones of this campaign. This campaign has nearly been going for a decade now. It's pretty amazing. And so I just wanted to read out some of those great milestones along the way, some in detail, some less so. But, you know, to start with, we really built a roar. Save Our Services began in 2010 and has built actively over more than nearly a decade. Beginning in 2010, by the time of the 2017 WA election, we built a database for over 30,000 union members and community supporters, and a Facebook page with 7,500 supporters. We organised and organised and organised. In the year before 2017 election, we had 30,000 conversations and mobilised a total of 500 volunteers, which is super impressive. And on to some of those other things. We had so many targeted conversations in the lead up to the 2017 election. As well as that, local school cuts. We prepared detailed reports focused on targeting electorates and detailing cuts in every WA public school. SOS also launched the local job and school reports, giving a detailed impact of rising TAFE fees and declining trainee and apprenticeship numbers. We also released our local transport and traffic reports, which detailed the impact of declining public transport use on traffic congestion across the metropolitan Perth. We saw the failed privatisation of Fiona Stanley Hospital. We highlighted especially the early appalling lack of concern by the Serco management for patient care and safety. Midland Hospital and Pregnancy Termination Services. We had a really successful petition protesting the church-managed Midland Public Hospital's refusal to offer termination services, leaving the local off-campus clinic exposed to protesters. We also, believe it or not, and something I was really proud of, is we ran the first ever political ad on domestic violence. Save Our Services was the first campaign to highlight through TV advertising in an election the importance of addressing domestic violence. The Labor government has increased funding since for domestic violence services, and for the first time appointed a minister with specific responsibility for these. Water privatisation. We backed the CSA campaign on liberal privatisation of part of Water Authority. 11, and a big one that lots of people will remember, we opposed Western Power privatisation. We joined with our comrades at the ETU and the ASU, led by Use Your Power campaign, to oppose the Liberal policy to sell Western Power. And also cutbacks on WorkSafe. The Liberal Party cut the number of WorkSafe inspectors and other support staff, and SOS joined with the CSA to protest this. And we've seen those levels since being increased under a Labor government, which is really, really important. So again, thank you and congratulations to everyone that's been part of our campaign. I did want to throw though to Ricky, because of all the panel members, you're definitely the one that has been part of Save Our Services for the longest time. So while we're on this, do you have any memory or event that happened in Save Our Services that you want to share?
Oh, look, I think there were heaps of events, and there's probably two things I would take away from it. One of them is really obvious, which is the work that was done around the cuts to education. There was something just really exhilarating about being part of that part of the campaign and seeing the community support just flood in behind our members in schools, whether they were SSTU's teacher members, whether they were our members or United Voices members, and get that support, that community support, and have people actually take the time to leave work, to leave school, and show up in massive numbers, tens of thousands, to protest those cuts. That was I don't know, just chills running down your spine kind of amazingness. So that was really, really brilliant. And I think sometimes in campaigns, we talk about the technical things that we've got, but actually the feeling stuff is really important. That's some of the stuff that really keeps you going and keeps you motivated. And the other thing, I suppose, for me is just seeing over that period of time, the public conversation about public services change, to the point where when we were in 2017, privatisation was the thing. It was the election issue. We managed to build over, and that doesn't just happen. It actually takes active energy to make that happen. Sometimes I think with the campaigns that we run as unions, we sort of say, oh, maybe that would have happened anyway, that maybe that would have been the issue anyway. And we know if we don't do it, it doesn't happen. We've got to actually take a bit of credit for the fact that we made that a key election issue, and that was a deciding issue. And we're continuing to reap the benefits. We've seen a whole lot of things come back in-house. We've seen, prisons come back in-house. We've seen Fiona Stanley come back in-house. We've seen the massive privatisation of Landgate fended off. There's a heap of, and water services as well come back in-house. There's been some fantastic achievements. So I think as much as they feel like they've happened politically because we ran a bloody awesome campaign.
And here, and we're still going to campaign. As promised, I do have something to show you all. So the public good is going to be our new public sector campaign. Let us know what you think of the name, and we're going to launch the campaign in a couple of weeks. It's really exciting. I can't wait. And I'm just going to share my screen with you all. This is our new logo. What does everyone think? We've still got the you can all still see the orange. We haven't given up on that. But a little more sleek, bit more 2020 perhaps.